Hello everyone out there in Channel 9 land. Welcome to part 2. Like all great TV shows like The Sopranos, before us we have decided to make a two-parter of our final show. So thank you for joining us for part 2. Jason Smith, Pete Lincoln, and of course our guest team historian Gordon Edes has been kind enough to do this wonderful two-part show with us. We didn't think it was going to be 2 parts, but it ended up that way because he's such an awesome interview.
Well, if you see the puzzled look on my face, Pete, it's only because since he compared it to The Sopranos, do I get off the team?
No, you're Paulie. You survived. Paulie survived.
You're the only survivor. We're here in Gordon Edes' office here in Fenway Park. The Lunenburg historian, Boston Red Sox historian, and he's been kind enough to give us a little tour of the Insiders Park of Fenway Park. You don't always get to see. So let's head out.
Let's head out and do it. And first, our trivia question for those watching home, since it's related to Fenway. Our part 2 trivia question, and you probably remember this. In what year were the monster seats built?
One of the things about the monster seats is they seem like they've always been here. And when you see old films of home runs being hit into the screen, it seems like it was eons
ancient
ago that happened. So what year were they actually put up and used for the first time? So what you see when you look out at the park, this would be my 70th consecutive season coming to Fenway.
That's awesome.
I see my own history here.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Who would I do this game with? Remember the first time I took Jason to a
absolutely.
game, the last game I went with my dad, where I sat for the World Series.
Absolutely.
And you got his tickets was to sit way out in right field. It's the only time we ever sat in section 3.
Oh, yeah, how about that?
And then we had season tickets for a year in the bleachers. And it's my own history and games that there. I came down to the Little League once and missed the bus. I was terrified once. One time we picked up Carl Mackey who had missed the trip. We took him home. This place has history.
Oh, I'm shocked by that.
It has history for all the people that come here.
Sure.
Because the park is the same.
Yes. And that's why, and I'll confess, Pete, I don't know where you were on the whole issue, but at the time that John Harrington was lobbying strongly for a new ballpark, I drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, he said it was physically unsustainable, Fenway Park, and economically untenable, and I think a lot of media members were right there alongside me chugging the Kool-Aid. We believed him, and thank God that the ownership group that did get the team, I mean, they are my bosses, but I think even objectively speaking, John Henry, Larry Lucchino, Tom Werner deserve immense credit for saving this ballpark. They've invested close to $400 million in upgrading this park. Pete, you're not going to believe it. They're actually going to expand the visiting clubhouse.
I heard that.
I
just heard that out.
And the thing that caused reporters everywhere to throw their hands up in exultation, they're actually going to replace the windows in the press box, which are impossible to open. There are more back surgeries that are a result of those windows. So they're and I loved the philosophy that guided Larry Lucchino as he oversaw the renovations here, and later Jonathan Galula, who does a fantastic job here, continuing to be the caretaker of this ballpark. Lucchino's philosophy was do no harm. Right? And so that's why, Pete, even something like the ladder on the monster, right? The ladder serves no purpose anymore because the screen's gone, right? I mean, the ladder, the groundskeepers used to climb up the ladder, fetch their balls out of the screen. So it serves no tangible purpose. Yet, it has a place in our history.
That's part of the park.
And you can point it out to kids and
the
friends.
The changes that they've made seem like they've been here forever.
They seem very organic.
You watch guys hitting the balls into the screen now. It looks, boy, when was that? 1910? When
right.
So it doesn't look like the place has changed at all. The only change I notice is the bathrooms. The troughs are
gone. The troughs are gone. Thank God for that one.
Troughs.
Oh my God.
So I thought one of the great thumbs up we got was opening day 2003. So we had put in the monster seats that winter. So playing Tampa Bay Rays. in the opener, managed by Lou Piniella, who Piniella had spent plenty of time in Fenway as a member of the Yankees, the Royals, as a manager. I'll never forget, because I was standing there, and he comes out of the third base dugout, and he looks up at the left field wall with the monster seats, and he says, "They look like they've always been there."
Yes, they do. They do.
It really does, and it's really cool. And you know, the Yankees, they built themselves a beautiful $1 billion palace, and you can see where they spent $1 billion, but you can never replace the memories, and that's what we have, and that's what endures, and that's why I can be a ghost whisperer.
That's right. That's right.
And there's such a history, because you pass the history down through the generations.
Right.
You know, like he passed it to me, I'm going to pass it on to mine. We took my son to his first Lowell Spinners game this summer.
Nice.
Just to see how he would do going to a game. So we're working him up to bring him to Fenway one of these days.
There you go.
So it's going to it goes through generations, and there's that common thread. You know, through families, like you said, through friends, through just through a fan base.
So what I'm
share.
What I'm wondering is, like, if you're part of the Lincoln progeny, right? Like, before anybody got a significant other or a spouse or whatever, did you subject them to the kind of test that they gave the Baltimore Colts fans in the great Barry Levinson movie Diner? You know? I mean, Pete, did Deb have to pass a 50-question exam?
I think I told you the story how I first met her. She was in my class and could name the starting lineup for the teams, so I let her watch the World Series with the guys.
Oh, that's funny.
But my kids. The first words my daughter said was Tony Nigiaro.
Oh, that's
the first thing she said.
Yeah.
But it was. There's a picture hanging in my house of me scoring a game, because I used to see every night score the game. My mother was an artist, paid me scoring the game. It's just imprinted on our souls.
Yeah,
it is.
And it's just a huge part of. We watch every single game, Gordon. Every single one. Every schedule the day.
And we text each other during the games when things are going on and whatever.
I used to keep a diary in grade school, and top of the diary would be the score of the game that day.
That's so cool. So there's an apparel shop, baseball apparel shop on Lansdowne Street called Baseballism. And one of the T-shirts they sell is a great, if you wanted to give a fan a snap quiz to see how much of a fan they are, the T-shirt says 6 + 4 + 3 = 2. So for the non-fan, they're looking at it, they have no idea. And of course for the fan, go ahead, Pete, tell them what it is.
We first saw that shirt when we went with you to Cooperstown.
That's right, because it was the same shop, Baseballism,
Storefront. It's a double play.
Right.
6 to 4 to 3.
6 is shortstop.
6, 4, 3.
4 is second base. 3 is first.
And anyone who grew up watching Jim Rice got very familiar with those numbers, because great Hall of Famer he was. We love Jim. Man, Jim hit it in so many double plays.
That kind of scoring. I took Jason to games when he was very little, and at first he had no idea what was going on. He watched the signs change and be excited about that. When he was about 6, I taught him one night how to score. Gave him the numbers, what each position stood for. Within 2 weeks, he understood the game perfectly.
Oh, that's great.
And a little quick story. We went a couple years later to a game, and he said, it was an afternoon game, and he said, I got to go to the bathroom. Well, he knew the whole park by then. So he says, go ahead. And he didn't come back, and I said, what happened to Jason? I looked over, and he's talking to these 2 ladies across the way, and they looked to me somewhat like ladies of the night. And I said, Jason, what are you doing? He says, I'm teaching them how to score.
How to score.
I said, I already know how to score.
Bada bing.
How did that? And I had no idea. Oh, can we take him home? And he's going.
So just by teaching the mathematics of the game, it was a hugely mathematical game. He was hooked on it.
It's true. It's very true. And again, the scoring hasn't changed for 100-something years. It's the same exact scoring method. When you take out the scoreboard.
And each person who scores can add their own little variations.
Sure. And it changes over the years. I look back at the ones when I was little. Wow, I didn't do that, and I do that now. And it's sort of
Jerry Remy used to sell his scorecards. You could buy them.
Hey, speaking of Rem, since you just mentioned him, I was on a radio show earlier this week up in Bangor, Maine. And they mentioned that Rem was coming up for a hot stove event there next month.
Really?
So
Wow.
What a great sign that is.
Yes.
I was blown away. I said, "Are you sure?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we just talked to him. He's coming up. He's excited about coming up." And I have a very close friend who just got hired by Nesson to be their new VP of Programming and Production, and Rem already called him to tell him he's gung ho to go for next season. So that's an amazing thing. He's our Rocky, Pete. You know, he keeps getting knocked down on the canvas and he keeps getting up. It's amazing.
Well, and when you talk about things passed through the generations and the Red Sox, we remember him as a player, not an announcer. So the younger generation, he's a great announcer. Yeah, he was a player before that. For the people who remember,
he was interviewed by TC before the Duck Boats left.
Okay,
and he was great. And he was like a kid again. He's so excited about
that's so cool.
So he's supposedly coming back just for home games next year. I heard.
That's to be negotiated still. I can't imagine he'll be traveling, but that is to be determined. So, given our audience, local access, Central Mass, everything, I would be so remiss if I didn't mention that in addition to, a kid from Lunenburg working here, we just hired a guy from Fitchburg High, Ben Coakley. He works in our human resources department. Great guy. And one of the guys he's a senior officer in charge of the facility, the actual facility, is a Leominster guy, John Lister. So I'm promising you, at some point next spring, you're probably going to see a picture of 3 Central Mass guys showing off their series rings in front of 4 series trophies. So, because we got to think there's probably not too many of us out in my favorite part of the country.
Just a couple things. It's kind of great to interview you because you spent your whole life interviewing other people. Who would you say has been your favorite interview in all the times you worked?
Wow.
Any particular person stands out?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can answer that. I mean, there are the guys who are the most articulate, then there were always the guys who are the most stand-up and all. So, like, Mo Vaughn, even in the midst of all that controversy that he was going through with Dan Duquette and Foxy Lady and contract and everything, win or lose, Mo was always in front of his locker. And he felt it was part of his role as a team leader to take the pressure off other guys. Pedro is a magnificent interview.
Of course, I bet.
Mikey Lowell was a great interview. Eck was an unbelievable. That's not going to surprise you. I
remember you told me once you were his favorite writer. He took you to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't know if I was his favorite all-time writer, but
one that he trusted the most.
Maybe that in Boston and all, because he spent a lot of years in Oakland. But yeah, I was the Boston writer that he invited to go.
That's great.
To the Hall of. It was unbelievable
That's so cool.
Because they took us down in the vaults and they let him hold stuff that people don't ever get to hold, and Eck was hugely appreciative of the history of the game and all.
And folks, if you haven't seen the interview with him that's been running on Nesson, don't miss it. It's wonderful.
It's on MLB Network.
That's right.
MLB Network.
That's right.
And it's a Newton guy, Bruce Kornblatt.
Absolutely fabulous interview.
And Bruce is the same guy who did the '67 documentary on MLB Network, which I thought was terrific as well. But maybe a guy a little bit under the radar. Deb's boy Millar was a lot of fun. There's no question.
No surprise.
But Rod Beck wasn't here for a long time. It seems relievers oftentimes have these great personalities. Keith Folk was an exception, but Folky's great now. Folky loves being a man around town in Boston now. It's amazing. He's gotten to be a bigger man around Boston than when he was playing here. But
he was in Autograph Alley this summer.
And he was. I bet he was fine, right? But when he was here, he was miserable. And you remember he made the famous "I don't care what Johnny
Burger King
from Burger King thinks." And you learned subsequently he was going through a terribly painful divorce at the time. I mean, he said he didn't want the season to end because he didn't want to go home. That kind of puts things in context. But I love I'm obviously not down there interviewing players on a daily basis anymore. But I really like our clubhouse now. I think there's some really good personalities there.
Seems like a lot of stand-up guys.
There are stand-up guys, and you know, Sale is terrific. You know, I've seen Porcello evolve since he's been here. J.D. Martinez. You know, Mook's a little bit guarded. You know, Mookie's a little bit guarded. Benny's still a baby. You know, we'll give Benny and I'll tell you about Jackie Bradley Jr. So, I'm interviewing Jackie, and I'm just struck by his thoughtfulness and his maturity and just kind of his broader worldview and all. And in the course of our conversation, I said, you know, Jackie, this is going to sound really strange coming from me. I said, but when I talk to you, I feel like I'm talking to an old soul, you know? And he gave me this little smile, right? He said, you're not the first person ever to say that, you know? So, you know, I hope, you know, it's probably been a topic you guys have debated on your show, how much value he brings to the Red Sox, but, I mean, he's the greatest defensive center fielder I've ever seen in a Boston uniform, and that's with all due respect to Freddie Lynn. I didn't see Pearsall. I know Pearsall by reputation.
Probably close.
Yeah. But what Jackie does, his anticipation is so uncanny.
Well, and we talked about that before, about how having him in center field makes the other people better. Because it makes the left fielder and the right fielder can cheat this way. It cuts down on things down the line. They have less ground to cover. So it's a ripple effect with how good he is. It's not just him out in center. So the whole outfield.
So when I was in Florida covering the Florida Marlins, they had a very fast, very spectacular outfielder named Chucky Carr.
Chucky Carr.
You remember Chucky Carr?
I remember Chuck Carr.
So Chucky Carr, he could climb halfway up the wall and he'd be making diving catches left and right, right? So I had the incredible privilege of interviewing Joe DiMaggio. DiMaggio lived down in South Florida at that time. I did a huge piece on him for his 80th birthday, right?
Wow.
So I'm asking him what he thinks of Chucky Carr, you know? And you can see the look on Joe's face. And he said, you know, because Joe was a very, very graceful outfielder, right? And in his sense, I don't put him in the class of JBJ for his defense, but he did have very good anticipation too. He said, you know, wondering if this Chucky Carr needs to dive as much as he does. I think maybe he thought he was playing for the Sports Center cameras a little bit. You know, Chucky Carr, he became a legend down in Lauderdale because I think after 1 year, he actually thought he could hold out. He was a holdout in spring training. Are you kidding? You're playing outfield for an expansion team,
right?
And it's not like you hit 350 and you're holding out. It won't surprise you though if I tell you who his agent was. It was at the very beginning of his career, a guy who claims that the what's the famous movie Maguire.
Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire. He claims that character was based on him. Drew Rosenhaus was Chucky Carr's agent, you know. But it's
sort of like what you were saying about meeting the players and stuff is that sometimes as fans, we kind of forget they're people sometimes too. Like at the end of the World Series, and it's funny you mentioned Jackie Bradley. He's there with his wife and kids. Who knew that he was married and had kids? I mean, it's sort of. I didn't know. I mean, so you forget that they are people behind the scenes, and just like the rest of us, they have to put family first sometimes, and they take their job home as much as we do. You know, they feel badly about when they don't do well, or great when they do well, and it's nice to have somebody who can put a personal touch on something like that.
That's something that's changed. There was no paternity leave in the old days.
Oh, no, not at all.
Francona talks about that, how when his first child was born, and he was playing for Pete Rose at the time, and Pete wouldn't let him go to Cincinnati. But you know, when you talk about the fact that it's sometimes good to be mindful that these guys, you know, you prick them that this red muscle is going to come out. I don't know if you saw it this summer, my interview with Brock Holt, where Brock Holt opened up about all the anxiety issues he was having and all of that. And you know, not only are they human beings like us, they're human beings who conduct their professional lives in a fishbowl.
Yes.
And a baseball player's getting, it's essentially getting critiqued every night. Every single night. It's like having Walter Parr sitting in the darkened theater on Broadway, going to review your performance.
But even worse, because they have bad days, and they've just come in after a loss. There's 40 guys in the locker.
Yeah.
With that right here. What are you going to say? What are you going to say?
Yeah. So I think, like, if I worked in media relations for a ball club, and had an opportunity to tell players how to deal with the media, I think the thing that fans appreciate more than anything is accountability.
Absolutely.
If you made an error, I made an error. I made a bad pitch.
I stunk.
That's right. I stunk.
And
it's going to happen.
And for all the flack that he took, did David Price ever own up to when he had a bad start?
Right.
You got to give him.
You give him props for
I
that.
stunk.
Yeah.
What do you want me to say?
And if the occasion, there's an opportunity to go into a little more explanation without it sounding like an excuse, do it. Don't immediately assume that the fans want to bury you.
Right.
The fans want
the writers do.
The fans want to forgive more often than not.
Oh, redemption is great. Like Price's redemption.
Oh, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's a hero now.
Sure. So.
One thing I did notice, though, you were talking about before, the old-time ball players are reluctant to admit the new ball players are as good as they were.
You know who was the worst at that, Pete? In my experience, who are you going to say?
Only because of what just happened. They were talking about, this is the greatest Red Sox outfield ever. And Rice says, well, Lynn and Evans and I were pretty good.
Well, you know what? And on that one, I would say, because I've had that conversation with Jim, and his point is, give this outfield a little more the test of time.
And
he's absolutely right.
He's absolutely right.
But the guy who is the worst, and you're going to laugh at this, Bob Feller.
Really?
Bob Feller, who was a great pitcher, Hall of Famer, broke into the big leagues, when he was 17 years old?
Yeah. By the way, one of the most prejudiced ball players that ever played.
Well, there was some of that going on, too. And, so Bob Feller, I remember when Pedro was at the height of his powers, so that would have been 98 to 2000, in that window. Hey, Bob, how does... could Pedro have pitched in your era? What do you think of Pedro? And he basically, he's all right. I mean, he would not. Any praise I elicited out of him was very grudging, and I don't remember him. I don't remember much in the way of praise. But this is also a guy when he was like in his 60s and still like throwing to fans and stuff, like batting practice for charity or whatever. And the fan would then ask him to autograph the ball he hit, Fella would write his name and then he'd put 73 years old when he hit me.
Supposedly there are more.
Couldn't yield an inch.
He signed more autographs than any of the ball players.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's because he went to all the shows.
Yeah.
I read that he's the cheapest one to get.
And for quite a time, he was the oldest living Hall of Famer for quite a while, wasn't he? Was he? I thought he was the oldest living Hall of Famer for a while.
I'm not sure of that because.
Pretty old, but but he continued to go to shows.
Because Bobby Dorr would have been older than Feller,
Dorr was right
among others. Yeah. So Peter, we making this a mini series?
I think so. I think our running time is.
So what we have in mind here is that we're going to go out and walk around the park, and people get a chance to see things that the average fan can't get to see.
Let's do it. And it's a December day, and we've run into almost spring-like weather.
It's beautiful.
It's almost 50 degrees or something
today.
That's better than a lot of opening days.
Right.
And one of the best things for us, it's only 2 months till pitches and catches report.
Yes, we're counting down the days.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll sign off for now.
So shall we head out to the park and see what there is to see?
We'll shuffle off to the stands now.
All right then. So we're in the dugout of the home team, the first base dugout of the Red Sox. It's grown a bit since back in the day. We've expanded the seating area so that to give the players a little bit more room. And oftentimes the NESN cameras capture the various gesticulations and reactions of the coaches, players. You never know what you might encounter in the dugout. Remember, maybe most famously is when Nomar and company taped up Pedro Martinez to one of the. There you go. We might even get a reenactment of it. Where they taped him up with duct tape. Because between starts, Pedro was a rather irrepressible sort. As Pete and Jason head toward behind home plate, to me it's very striking that the distance from the front row behind home plate to the dish is only 42 feet, which means if you're a fan sitting in the front row, you're closer to the home plate than the pitcher is. So we're in what we call the Royal Rooters Club. Which is down the first base line a bit. It's a room that's open for season ticket holders to come and eat pregame. Our tour groups also, I believe they end their tours in here. So they, unfortunately, it's not something that fans who come on a given night can see. But there's some really cool things. For example, right now, we're looking at what we call our World Series baseball collection, which are baseballs autographed by World Series teams of a given year. And if you zero in, for example, in 1949, you can see Joe DiMaggio is on the sweet spot. In 1973, Dick Williams, then the manager of the Oakland A's, but had been the manager of our Impossible Dream Team. So our curator, a very talented woman named Sarah Coffin, puts together these display cases like the one we're looking at right now, which is in honor of our Boston Strong Team, the 2013 champions. You can see a jersey autographed by all the players. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was the jersey worn by our team in the first game played after the Marathon bombing, because typically the home jersey does not feature Boston in the front. It always features Red Sox. So again, a special patch that was added to the uniform in honor of Be Strong, which really was an inspiration throughout the season. And the base that you're showing is from the American League Championship Series from Game 2.
And Poppy giving his famous speech, there is no reference to an F-bomb in this little write-up right here, but you recognize that.
This base over here, it's the famous base stolen by Dave Roberts in the fourth game of the 2004 series against the Yankees. One of the most renowned steals, other Jackie Robinson steal of home, maybe.
Yeah, I was waiting to see, Pete, what steal in Red Sox history you would even compare it to. The only other stolen base of note in Red Sox history that comes to my mind immediately is Jacoby Ellsbury's steal of home
Of
Andy Pettit of the Yankees.
Right.
But that steal is remembered not only for the boldness of Ellsbury to steal home, but the totally nonchalant reaction of the hitter, J.D. Drew, who basically didn't react. It was unbelievable. Everybody else in the ballpark is going nuts, and J.D.'s ready to step back into the box.
He's not known for emotional.
No, he wasn't.
This is pretty. We have some of these 500th game. They gave away bling, a big copy. And we had these 5,500 games.
This is a new case. So So this is a new display that we've just added. Sarah has just added. She's entitled it Teammates in World War II. Some pretty extraordinary artifacts here, including a very stylish bomber jacket worn by Ted.
Swing around and see this shot here. That was Gardner Day at Fenway.
That's the Gardner chair.
Big Gardner chair.
Yeah. I wonder if that's possibly Pete Earl Johnson, who was awarded a Bronze Star and later a Silver Star for bravery in the Battle of the Bulge. He held the rank of First Lieutenant, but I don't know. I actually have the privilege of writing the accompanying plaques, that explanatory plaques. That's part of my job.
It's my first hero there, Walt Dropo. I was a left-handed first baseman, and he was a rookie the year I started following baseball. I loved him.
And he had an enormous rookie season, right?
And years later, I met him at a card show, and I said, you know, you were my first hero. And he said, don't say that.
So he drove in 144 runs as a rookie, Pete, which was 1 RBI short of what remains the Major League record. Do you know who said it? Red Sox player, 1939.
Jimmy Fox.
Rookie.
Williams.
Ted Williams. Yeah.
So here we have a ball from the famous Clemens 20 strikeout game that still pops up on Nesson every once in a while when they're strapped for material, but we were actually at this game, which we've talked about on the show before. Look how young Clemens is there. It's pretty amazing that that's the same guy who...
100,000 people claim to be, but we actually
we were one of about 13,000, I think it was, that were actually there.
So there's a story about these bat collections that we have in display in the Royal Rooters Club, and the displays themselves are actually revolving with various themes. We've had some recently for the 86 team, the 67 team, and as you see, the current display is All Stars at Bat. Now these bats are loaned to us by a Philadelphia lawyer, works for the Securities and Exchange Commission, named Jeff Bujukos, and he has a personal collection of every a bat from every position player who has played for the Red Sox since 1960. Going into this World Series, he was missing just 2 bats to fill out his collection. One was belonged to an infielder named Carmen Fanzone.
I remember him.
Carmen Fanzone was more famous as a trumpet player than as a third baseman, I think. He ended up playing for the Cubs and was frequently appeared in jazz clubs in Chicago on Rush Street. And the other bat belonged to a player named Ken Polson, who played on an Impossible Dream Team, Impossible Dream Team in 1967. The story behind Polson is a poignant one. Dalton Jones gets sent out on military leave, National Guard Reserve leave for 2 weeks. So they reached down to Class A Winston-Salem to get another infielder, left-handed hitting second baseman, and that was Ken Polson. And Polson, when he received the call-up, it was the weekend he was scheduled to be married in Winston-Salem. They had to postpone the wedding. Polson played 2 weeks for the Sox. I believe he got 1 hit. Dalton Jones came back. Polson was sent back to Winston-Salem, and he never played in the major leagues again. And what's odd and poignant is that for some unexplained reason, and I talked to Jim Lomborg, who was the player rep that year, Polson never received even a partial World Series share. He never got a pennant ring from '67, really never got any kind of acknowledgement, and that hurt. And it's kind of my intention to try to make it up to the family here in 2018. Polson just died last December, so it's kind of a bittersweet story, to say the least.
So this is the case from all the early World Series, 1912, 16, 17, 18, and what's really interesting, look at this bat from 1912 from Buck O'Brien. It's almost like a stick. There's really not much of a slope to the handle or anything like that. So, among other reasons, you can see why it's perfect for bunting, but not so perfect for home runs. So, and this is why it's so hard to compare stats from earlier eras, because look at the equipment, the gloves, the bats, the balls that you played with 100 years ago. It's not even close to the streamlined and custom-made things that athletes use today. This is just kind of thrown together in a factory, and you grabbed it and used it.
Barry Bonds could not hit 73 home runs with that.
No way.
So, and Deb, if you'll note the World Series watch fobs. Back in the early years of baseball, players on World Series winners were not awarded rings as they are today. They were usually given ceremonial pins or watch fobs like you see there for 1912 and 1915. Well, in 1918, when the Red Sox won what I've described as the most joyless World Series in Red Sox history, one that was almost interrupted by a player strike. It took over an hour before the team finally took the field. There was so much bad blood between the Baseball Commission, which would be essentially the Commissioner's office now, Van Johnson, and the Red Sox, that no ceremonial pins were awarded that 1918 team. We rectified that, was more than an oversight, insult. 75 years later, at a ceremony in 1993, we gave ceremonial pins to descendants of that Red Sox team.
Yeah, the 1918 strike was a prelude to 1919.
Sure was.
That's right.
Same deal. Discontent, the players weren't getting paid for their extra efforts. Well, this is the seat, supposedly 502 feet away, that Ted Williams hit a home run on Freddie Hutchinson in 1945. Being a skeptic, if you pan left them and show how far this is from the field, pan quickly and see how far the ball is going to have to travel. It's a long way.
That's a long way.
And no one in recent times has hit one anywhere near that, even in batting practice. But the story was this guy was sitting out here taking a snooze with a straw hat on, and it broke his hat. So
that's the legend. We don't know if it's
like
true.
a lot of legends, it may be apocryphal, but it's still a great story.
All right, so while Pete and Jace have expressed a certain amount of skepticism about whether Ted actually hit one 502 feet, let me tell you about the opinion of another central Massachusetts native, a guy named Greg Rybarczyk, who is a naval nuclear engineer who now works in our baseball operations department. Greg, who is the guy who created the home run hit tracker, which you might have seen on ESPN, did all the calculations of that home run that Ted hit in 1946. He took the wind speed, and you have to remember, the day before that game, we had hurricane force winds in Boston. In fact, the guy was blown out of his boathouse in Wakefield that previous day. So, no, they didn't play in a hurricane on Sunday, but there were still very strong winds. And you also have to remember that upper structure that we have that is now part and parcel of Fenway Park, that wasn't there. It was a flat grandstand roof, and there weren't high-rises behind it. So the chance for much stronger wind currents were great. So Rybarczyk took, he measured the launch angle of Ted's swing. He calculated, probably estimated, the velocity of the pitch from Fred Hutchinson. He took into consideration the temperature and the wind speed. And he said, yes, indeed, even though Pete and Jay say otherwise, and David Ortiz say otherwise, that Ted could have hit one 502 feet, to which I say, if it's good enough for a nuclear naval engineer, it's good enough for me.
There is one other moral to that. As we all know, statistics can be manipulated any way you'd like.
Absolutely.
Since 1995, the Red Sox have been electing players to the Red Sox Hall of Fame, not to be confused with the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. This is for Red Sox players who played at least 3 years for the ball club. And actually, it's one of the cool parts of my job now. Every 2 years, we elect a new class, and I actually oversee the committee that chooses the Hall of Famers, sort through the nominations, and conduct the voting. And what's really cool for me is that I actually get to write the text on these plaques. So that makes me feel like part of the furniture. You know, long after I'm gone, there'll be a piece of me in Fenway Park. We're in what we call the Dell EMC Club. It's one of the premium areas of the ballpark. There's a private dining room in here. There's some wonderful seats that are just outside the dining room. To the left of the Dell EMC Club is actually where our owner, John Henry, sits. In this club are displayed our Gold Glove winners. We're going to be adding a couple this year with, what do we have, Mookie Betts and Jackie Bradley Jr.
And Kinsler.
And Ian Kinsler, who just signed with the San Diego Padres. But we'll still put his glove in here because he earned it with us.
These are the Silver Sluggers won by Red Sox over the years, given for excellence at each position. This past year, Mookie won as best right fielder and the best DH, and outfielder too. So he actually won 2 with J.D. Martinez, and they're on display here.
Fenway Park, the winter scene. Fenway in repose, and Jace, of course, with a firm grip. Oh, he's waving that ball fair. This home run in Game 6, the 1975 World Series. Pat Darcy on the hill. Will it be fair? It's gone! The Red Sox win! Of course, that was my poor imitation of Dick Stockton's call on Carlton Fisk's legendary home run to win Game 6 of the 75 series.
Well, we're back after our tour. Great to see Fenway in the wintertime.
Only 2.2 miles by my iPhone. What was it, Jace? 5,200 steps?
5,200 steps, so we got our workout in today.
Between us, we're 200 years old, I think. Well, we thought we'd just ask Gordon his opinion on some of the hot topics of the day. The first thing we want to talk about is this movement afoot to limit the shifting. Do you think that's going to happen? Is it a good idea or not?
Well, I didn't think it was going to happen, Pete, but there seems to be, some of the more recent reporting suggests that there's a lot of support in the commissioner's office to doing so. I mean, do I think shifting has changed the game? Absolutely. Do I think you can legislate it out of the game? I mean, the history of shifts, as you well know, goes back to Ted Williams with the Boudreaux shift, and I think was it Eddie Dyer who was the manager of the Cardinals in '46? I think he used a bit of a shift in the World Series. So the idea that you're going to legislate shifts out of the game, I have a tough time with that.
Well, explain what the purpose of limiting the shifts is. Why do they want to do that?
Well, because too many games, the games are coming down to what have become known as the 3 true outcomes: walks, strikeouts, and home runs. It's simply, for the first time in baseball history, the number of strikeouts exceeded the number of hits. So that's what's the impetus behind.
And they're trying to get more offense back into the game. Here's my suggestion: do away with the pitchers batting.
100%.
In the National League? Yeah,
well, in the World Series,
right.
Red Sox Dodgers pitchers were 0 for 13 with 6 Ks.
Sure.
No offense there.
No, that's right.
So why you harm the offense and then try to make another rule to improve it? Doesn't make sense.
Right, but see that, and clearly, in terms of impacting National League play, that makes great sense. But that doesn't address this greater issue of how do you get more action into our games, American League games.
With the walk, strikeout, and home run.
And now with this huge emphasis on launch angles, hitting balls in the air, which again started with Ted Williams. If you go back and study his the science of hitting, he talks a lot about uppercutting the ball. Baseball, traditionally anyway, has often been very cyclical. You know, that
Right. Absolutely.
and hasn't required rules to
It'll work itself out.
to swing the pendulum
The
back
last
in
major
that
change was '68 when they dropped the mound.
Right, and then 73 with the DH, of course,
yes,
yeah.
But you're right. Baseball adapts. And so
they have,
okay,
yes.
so we're gonna shift. Fine, I'll learn to hit singles the other way.
Right.
It'll happen at some point. Because you know what? Guess what? Tampa Bay came up with the major shifting. Probably Tampa Bay will come up with a bunch of lineup full of singles hitters that go the other way.
So I'm guessing you guys aren't in favor of starting the 12th inning with a runner on second base.
No, a little ridiculous.
See, real baseball, I think people like that aren't really fans. They're not long-time fans. Because they just, the times are, instant gratification takes too long. So to try to figure out ways to make the game shorter by things like, we'll just say you can go to first base on an intentional
Right.
walk. That shortens the game tremendously.
Yeah.
Living the mound visits, except for Gary Sanchez, that isn't a
Right.
Well, you know, I do empathize with the frustration of some fans over the length of the games. I know if it's a great game, you're not going to care if it's 3 hours, 3.5 hours, even 4 hours. But for an ordinary game to go well in excess of 3 hours, when you and I both, you know, grew up in a time where games were routinely completed in 2.5 hours, it is a big commitment in our day and age. You know, I'm worried about baseball fans getting enough sleep every night, you know?
Well, that's then start the playoffs before 8 o'clock.
There you go. Hey, well, ESPN announced that they are going to start the Sunday night baseball.
Nights,
7 o'clock, baby.
Thank God.
Yeah,
Sunday nights are at 7 now. Thank God. So
That's interesting.
Yep.
It's, well, the length of game matters more than it did now, but in the old days, because we used to go doubleheaders.
Right, sure. But those doubleheaders would be over in the time it takes to play one game
Well,
now.
not quite.
Almost.
5 or 6 hours. But that was standard. But it's just, and the length of game also has been impacted by television.
Oh, without a doubt.
They averaged about 90 seconds between innings in the old days. They just tossed the glove on the field and go play. But
right. No, it's a lot longer.
Hasn't TV agreed to shorten the breaks?
I think they did in the playoffs.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, make them a little shorter.
But I remember even cutting back from the ads, you would have lag time from when the camera turned back onto the field and the first pitch was actually thrown.
Right.
Now, if you watch Fox, the camera turns on, bing, he's already in his windup, ready to go.
There's a little guy in the dugout.
Right, because they're trying to cram as many ads into that little space as they can, and that I think more than anything is the biggest impact.
And the other thing we've been talking about is the whole glut of Hall of Fame people they've been putting in lately. It seems in the old days to get into the Hall of Fame there were a couple of years there was no one inducted.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Pete. So, I mean, and particularly the Veterans Committee, baseball was starting to express some frustration with the Veterans Committee because they weren't picking anybody for a number of years, and it requires 12 votes from the 16-member committee to be chosen, and usually involving personalities on that committee would, you know, have a hard time debating whether it was morning or afternoon when they were sitting down to talk. So, you know, clearly this year with the selection by the committee, what would they call it, the Today's Game era committee?
Yes.
The selection of Harold Baines, a designated hitter, and a guy who belongs in the Hall of Very Good Players.
Yes,
but
exactly. The Hall of Very Good.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good for a very long time.
I never received more than 6% of the writers' votes.
No,
6%.
And if you look, I mean, you know, oftentimes when you're evaluating a player's career, sometimes you look at their peak performance years. Maybe it's a 7-year period.
Right.
But even that, Baines never had a knock your socks off. But did he ever have a 30 home run season?
No, the last 17 years of his career, he didn't get a single MVP vote.
Yeah.
17 years without an MVP. He averaged 19 homers a year in the best offensive era in baseball history
Right.
as just a DH.
Yeah.
Now, I have no problems with the DHs getting in. Edgar Martinez should be in, Poppy will get in, but if you're going to only be a DH, you have to be extraordinary.
Right.
It's sort of like a relief pitcher. You have to be extraordinary to do it.
So I look forward to having a conversation with I think I might have mentioned it, Tony La Russa, who was on that committee. He's a special advisor to Dave Dombrowski. Of course, Baines played for him in both the Chicago and Oakland. So I imagine Tony was working the hustings pretty well for.
Did you see the interview he had with Mad Dog?
I did,
Yes, that did not go well.
Pretty nasty.
Yeah, it didn't go well, and
No.
and Tony I think what the best defense he offered was that he led in game-winning RBIs.
Yeah, which isn't even a
which is-
stat. It's an obsolete stat.
So like I said, I'd like to have a deeper conversation, and I'm sure Red Sox fans are probably a little befuddled that Lee Smith got in. So although, Pete, so Smith was on the '88 team that won the division, but he also played a big role in winning the division in 1990, even though he wasn't on the club. Care to take a shot at that one?
All I know is he fell asleep in the bullpen.
Lee Smith was traded for Tom Brunansky.
Yes, he was. That's right.
Bruno's
That's exactly right.
Bruno-
Yes, it
Bruno
was.
came from the Cardinals.
Sketch,
So I don't know if that's enough to get you elected in the Hall of Fame, but he did earn his little niche in Red Sox history.
And you talk befuddlement, and especially from Red Sox fans, there's a lot of befuddlement as how did Baines and Smith get in ahead of Dwight Evans?
Well, and Dwight Evans wasn't even on the ballot,
right? Or Lou Whitaker.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not put Whitaker and Evans in ahead of Smith and Baines? That boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it was last year that Evans would have been eligible to be on the ballot, and he was not even placed on the ballot. Louis Tiant was on the ballot and got very, very little support.
Which is astounding too, because we've talked about that before. You look at his stats and Catfish Hunter's stats; they're amazingly similar. And Hunter was a shoo-in, and Tiant can't get in.
And for me, what makes Tiant's case even more compelling, I mean, I do think you have to factor in a player's personal circumstances too.
Absolutely.
I mean, he essentially exiled from his homeland, Cuba. His father told him, don't come home from Mexico. He encountered extreme prejudice early in his career as he's coming up with Cleveland and everything. And then he was basically two different pitchers. In the 60s, when he had the 1.61 ERA with Cleveland, he was a power pitcher. He's a great pitcher. Then he gets hurt. He's released by a couple of clubs, then essentially reinvents himself as the magician,
a jump baller.
the El Tianti that we came to love in Boston, and performed on baseball's big. I mean, those two games against the Reds in '75, against arguably the greatest positional lineup in baseball history, the Big Red Machine.
Especially the second 168 pitches.
Unbelievable,
And I think sometimes you also have to factor in past the player, because it is a Hall of Fame, it's famous people. You have to factor in the cultural icon part of it too. And Louis Tiant is a cultural icon in baseball. Everybody knows him. He has his own stand right out here at Fenway Park. But everybody knows Louis with the big cigars and the half English, half Spanish that he was
Gordon, one of the factors they take into consideration voting is character. Now, we've talked about that a lot. How do you determine character? Well, Louis is character plus.
Right.
No scandal involved, nothing other than what he did to bring the international flavor to this country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he presaged the Pedro phenomenon, really. I mean, he was the 70s equivalent.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure that, I know the character is listed as one of the criteria, but if you look at the membership, the roles of players that are on the Hall of Fame that may have been a bit lacking in character.
Yes.
And here's the thing. For me, and this is introducing another topic a little bit related to the whole question of do you vote for steroid cheats or whatever.
Well, that's character too.
Well, it is, but the way I would address that is, the Baseball Hall of Fame to me, is a museum. It's not a shrine.
Yes,
Jack-
yes, we've
All right.
said that
more
All right.
times.
Yes, we have.
So,
Yes.
okay, and so, to keep people like Clemens and Bonds out of the Hall of Fame when they were clearly the best players
That's right.
of their era. If you want to put on their
Absolutely.
plaques that they played in this steroid
Absolutely.
era, trust me, there are already guys who are in the Hall of Fame who cheated.
Absolutely.
And used banned substances as well.
Gaylord Perry got in, and he admitted that he doctored the ball,
Right.
and they still put him in.
But even the steroid era guys are in already that we don't know. Yeah.
Well, Babe Ruth was a miserable character
He was,
in some
yeah.
ways,
And-
and Ty Cobb, the classic miserable character.
Yeah,
you know?
Ty Cobb more so than Babe. Babe was more happy than miserable.
But I didn't mean miserable in the sense of being miserable, but
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
he had contracted syphilis.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, okay.
And
There you
when
go.
we talk about the steroid, what it does is that there is a block of old school voters that everybody's tainted. Like when
Well, that's
Bagwell
right.
got in,
Yeah.
there was never any proof. Bagwell was never ever accused, but they said he played then, he took
Right.
steroids.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it clouds that whole era.
Sure.
And you have to be consistent in your thinking.
Well, they've
you know?
clouded their
Yeah.
whole era.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Play-
True.
Yeah, they bear accountability for that.
That's true.
But
yes.
when I gave up my Hall of Fame vote, I think I explained to you why, right? Because the baseball writers actually said I could continue to vote, and I recused myself. And here was my reasoning. So let's say I vote for Curt Schilling, who's a borderline Hall of Fame candidate. People would say, well, of course he did. He works for the Red
Right,
Sox.
exactly.
Now, let's say I didn't vote for Curt Schilling.
How can you not support a Red Sox?
Yeah, no, people would say, holy smoke, that guy works for the Red Sox, and
Yeah.
even he didn't vote for Curt Schilling?
Yeah.
So the perception of the perception of not being able to be objective about it, I
Understandable.
took myself out of it, so.
Understandable.
But you know, the writers have always voted, and the reason they voted because no one else saw the games. But writers have to have some sort of bias because you cover a team, or you've had bad experiences with good players. I'm sure some of the great players that you interviewed weren't too great to you, and so that has to stick in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's your responsibility as a writer to try to set those personal prejudices, biases against a player aside, and consider them on the body of their work. I'm sure many of my colleagues have voted for players they couldn't stand personally.
Yeah, but 1949, two writers left Williams off the entire
Yeah, well,
ballot,
yeah, that's
so,
yeah.
Well, that might have factored into
And
why
one
it
of
took
them was
Rice
a Boston
so long.
writer.
Yeah.
Well, that might have factored in why it took Rice so long. Rice had issues with the press in his career.
I thought the story was a Boston writer has been debunked.
No,
That's conversation for further show
Yes, for
of
another
the
show,
Pete
yeah.
and Chase
Yeah.
comedy hour here.
Well, we have a lot of laughs on this show.
Oh, we sure do.
There's no mad dog here.
No.
Okay.
Did we do our second trivia answer about the monster seats?
Yes.
We did.
I believe we did.
Yeah,
Yes, we did. Yes.
So I guess that wraps it up, and we can't thank Gordon Edes enough for helping us out. He's been a
It's been
wonderful
great.
interview.
Yes,
Thanks.
Did a
It's
wonderful job.
fantastic.
And we'll see you anon, and Deb's going to sign off with a little look around Gordon's lair in here.
Yeah, my little office that right above Jersey Street, right by Gate A. Some pretty cool. I think you'll recognize most of the photos that I have in my office. It's pretty amazing to be able to call Fenway Park your office. So I'm
It's a
grateful
long
for
way
the
from your
opportunity.
bedroom writing articles. Enterprise. See you anon.